That's it. But
Tell you, that's the
thank you,
hardest
Chris.
part. Yeah, well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be back yet again. I think this is what my third time technically now. Talked about eagles and farmland raptors and now chimney swifts. So my name is Chris Eberly. I'm executive director of the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, and I'm really happy to be talking about chimney swifts, which at one point or another during the day is my favorite work, my favorite bird. Um, my favorite bird keeps shifting, but I, I've known about the Baltimore Bird Club's chimney swift efforts for a while, and I'm really glad now to be kind of connecting with them a little more formally. And they have been doing a great job. And toward the end of the presentation, I'll show some of the statistics that they've collected over 20 years now, I guess, of doing these counts in the fall and also in the spring. Um, so, yeah, um, I will go ahead, share my screen. Okay, let's see. Oh, well, hang on. I've got too many monitors and I never know which one is going to happen on. So I will start it first. There we go. Now I've lost that. Technology, living and dying by it. Okay, share that. I also want to do that. Okay, and Bronwyn, just can you verify that you're actually seeing the presentation?
Yep, we're seeing the presentation. You are cooking with butter.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks. So I want to thank um, some of the Baltimore Bird Club members who have been involved in this chimney swift project over the years. Joan Swee has done a phenomenal job, and a lot of the slides I'm using tonight actually came from Joan and her presentation. Also working with Alice Greeley Nelson and Carol, as you mentioned, Bronwyn. So I want to thank them for their input into this. And yeah, let's get started talking about our neighbor, not a nuisance, the ordinary and extraordinary chimney swift. The Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership has a mission of maintaining and enhancing native bird populations and the habitats they use by fostering partnerships with public and private entities and promoting community action. And there are a number of things in there, especially the community action, or sometimes we call it citizen science, that this talk will be touching on. Our vision is to have a healthy and sustainable landscape for Maryland's birds and its communities, which includes the people in those communities. And one thing I always like to do is try to connect birds, habitat, and people throughout Maryland and actually beyond. Um, and especially now that we were earlier talking about Swift Roost in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is my hometown stomping grounds through high school. So I just want to start off with a little bit of dire news that came out in a report 2 years ago in the journal Science that documented almost, well, actually more than 1 in 4 of our native bird species have disappeared since 1970. So basically, over the last 50 years, we have lost almost 3 billion birds out of the breeding population in the US and Canada. Among those are aerial insectivores, which are things such as the barn swallow, John's favorite bird. Um, we've lost 160 million aerial insectivores in total since 1970. It's an overall decline of 32%. And some of those species include barn swallow, that has lost 40%, common nighthawk, Chuckwill's widow, eastern whippoorwill, and our focus bird for this evening, the chimney swift, which has lost fully 2/3 of its population in the last 50 years. And Bronwyn, the miracle of being able to do digital presentations versus having slides ahead of time, I just threw this slide in right after you mentioned the billions of birds lost to windows. Actually, the number is up to 1 billion birds that are killed every year in the US and Canada with collisions with windows. And these are not necessarily with skyscrapers all the time. The majority of these are with homes and small businesses. And I do just want to mention um, that the largest human induced source of mortality for birds are cats. And these include feral and owned, basically any free ranging cat. And then you can see vehicles and industrial oriented collisions on there too. All these together just really have a significant impact on our birds. Now, to get into the swifts a little bit, swifts are in the family Apotidae, and they are worldwide. There are 18 genera of swifts, and within those, there are a total of 112 species of swifts around the world. The conservation status of a lot of these are of least concern. Let me get this on here. So you can see about 60% or 67 of the 112 species are of least concern according to the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. A few that are near threatened, some that are vulnerable. 25% of swift species really we don't know enough about to know what their population status is, what the numbers are, what the trends are. Um, okay, there we go. The chimney swift is one of those that is considered vulnerable on the red list of the IUCN. So I wanted to just put up this picture showing the 18 different genera, the different genus names of swifts, and this shows then the number of species within each of those. And this should add up to 112. Now, within the United States, we have 4 different swift species that regularly occur here in 3 different genera. And you can see those here. The Ketura includes the chimney swift and its western counterpart, the Vaux's swift. And boy, I have looked long and hard to try to look at how do you pronounce Vaux's. And it's a very interesting rabbit hole to go down. The French pronunciation, of course, would be Vaux swift, but this was a person that had British origins. Anyhow, that's another talk. So the range of chimney swifts, you can see the reddish colors up there are in the breeding areas, nesting areas. So pretty much the eastern half of the United States. The darker reds tend to show higher densities of these birds. And as you might suspect, during the breeding season, these birds just really fan out. And as I'll mention again later, we have all these huge chimneys and maybe swift towers and all these different nesting areas for swifts, but only one pair of swift will ever nest in a single structure during the nesting season. So that means that the populations really are scattered out. And you can see then the wintering range down here in South America. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But in terms of population trends, I mentioned that the population of chimney swifts are down 67% since 1970. The Breeding Bird Survey is a roadside survey done once a year. It's over a 24.5 mile route with stops every half mile that the observers count everything they see and hear for 6 minutes. And over 1966 to 2015, this trend is declining at 2.19% per year. So if you do that for 50 years, you can see that losing 2.19% every year is really going to add up. And over the last, well, from 2005 to 15, that trend actually um, decreased, got worse, to 2.78% decline per year. All the areas in red basically are losing populations. So there are no gains anywhere on these breeding bird survey routes. It's all negative trends within the US. And again, the IUCN puts this as vulnerable. So we had a bunch of them that were least concerned, some near threatened, but vulnerable is next to being endangered. So they're definitely heading in the wrong direction. Partners in Flight is a collaboration of entities across the continent, and their science team has done a wonderful job for many years assessing the populations and the status and trends of various species. And looking at the population estimate globally, the estimate today is just under 9 million for the population size. Now, looking at this two-thirds decline means that back in 1970, the population was estimated to be around 27 million. So since 1970, we are down now under 10 million. Maryland is estimated to have almost 100,000, and most of those, 60% of those, are in the coastal plain. Now, Baltimore County is sort of split between the coastal plain and the Piedmont. So the other 30% are up in the Piedmont. So we're kind of right in that middle line, but kind of where they are. And the Breeding Bird Atlas project, the second atlas that ran from 2002 to 2006, showed a fairly good distribution. Now, this just shows the distribution. It doesn't show anything about abundance, but just the distribution across the state. You can see it's pretty good. This graph here, the red triangles show where the first atlas had detections in that atlas block, but the second did not. And the green circles are the opposite, where the birds were not detected in an atlas block in the first atlas in the mid 80s, but were detected in the second atlas. So you can see it's kind of a smattering all over the place. There's really not a whole lot of significance there. And you can also see that in terms of the distribution, we lost 21 blocks, which out of the total number of blocks is basically very minimal, less about 2% reduction in the blocks. So the distribution is kind of staying the same, but the numbers are dropping. So what is in a name? So here's going to be a little bit of history of taxonomy. Carl von Linné is considered the father of taxonomy. He developed the binomial naming system, which is the genus and species that we use in most scientific critters. And if you attend these future talks that Bronwyn was talking about, you'll probably learn a little bit more about rodents and Lepidoptera and all those things. But Carl Linnaeus was so uh, taken and committed to his binomial naming convention that in his publications he used his Latinized name, which was Carolus Linnaeus. So he was a little bit of a fanatic, you might say. So in 1758, he was the first to describe the chimney swift, and he named it um, Hirundo pelagica. And Hirundo now is the genus we know of for the swallows. And up until the early 1800s, this bird was commonly called the American swallow. In 1825, James Francis Stevens moved all these small, short-tailed New World swifts to the genus Ketura, and there are 11 species in that genus, and they remain in the Ketura genus as of today. So these are um, primarily the New World swifts. So all the Keturas are in North America, Central or South America. The chimney swift scientific name is Ketura pelagica. And we're going to get some good lessons here. Ketura is a combination of two ancient Greek words, kaite, which means bristle or spine, and ura, which means tail. So when you put this together, it's really an apt description of the bird's tail, as the shafts of all 10 tail feathers end in sharp, protruding points. So essentially, it's a bristle tail. The specific name of pelagica is derived from the Greek word pelagikos, which means of the sea, but this is really thought to be a reference to its nomadic lifestyle than any reference to the sea. And this theory is strengthened by the later assignment of the specific name Pelasgia, which was after the nomadic Pelasgi tribe of ancient Greece. And therefore, this name probably refers more to its nomadic lifestyle than anything of reference to the sea. The family name Apodidae is from that Greek word there. If you know Greek, you might know how to pronounce that, but basically it's apus, which A means not or not having, and then pus means foot, which means apodidae is referring to not having a foot or footless, which is a reference to the small, weak legs of these birds. They do have feet, but they are just very small, and basically they can't perch like most other birds do. There are no subspecies within Ketura pelagica. However, the boxes swift, Ketura vauxi, has 6 subspecies, which is a rather interesting piece of trivia. So, the earliest known record of what evolved into the swifts was Eocypsilus rowii. And if there are any people out there that know how to pronounce these words a lot better, forgive me. This was a tiny fossil discovered in around 2013 in Wyoming that was identified as the evolutionary precursor to both swifts and hummingbirds. So the fossil was named Eocypsilus rowii, and it was in between the hummingbird and the swift in size, and it was fully feathered. It was they surmised it was less than 5 inches and less than an ounce. And they did discover through this fossil record that it was fully feathered. It lived approximately 50 million years ago in the Eocene epoch. Now, hummingbirds have short wings in relation to their body. Swifts have long wings in relation to their body. And the E. rowii was somewhere in between that. Now, another thing that they shared was this short, stout humerus bone, which is actually shared by E. rowii and swifts and hummingbirds today. All right, we're going to get into the phylogenetic aspects of this bird. So this is where your brain might get really big when you're learning these things. Swifts are most closely related to the tree swifts of India, Southern Asia, and Malaysia. Tree swifts are in the family Hemiprognidae, uh, Hemiprognidae. Hemi meaning half, and progne meaning swallow. So it's sort of a half swallow, if you will. The tree swifts are the sister to the swifts, and these taken together are considered to be sister to the hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are found only in the Western hemisphere, and as I said, the tree swifts are over India, Southern Asia, Malaysia. These three families together constitute what was traditionally called Apodoformes, and are now in turn most likely the sister to the owlet nightjars of Australia and New Guinea. So you can see this mixing of Old World and New World families in these different orders. And when you look at all these together, of course, this forms the Caprimulgiformes, which is what all these are in. And you probably are more familiar with nightjars, Caprimulgids, that are one of the main families within Caprimulgiformes. Now, looking at the larger phylogenetic tree, the Caprimulgiformes are here, and swallows are way up here in Passeriformes in the O-signs. And so you can see really not at all closely related. Swifts are not at all closely related to swallows. So what makes a swift a swift? Well, superficially, they are similar to swallows, but really are not closely related, as we just saw. Their plumage generally is a dull gray brown, and many species have white markings on either the throat, tail, or rump. Their wings are very long and pointed. The tail is short in most species, but it may be long and forked or alternatively spine tipped in some. The body is tiny to small, it's compact, it's cylindrical fusiform in shape, or what we like to call cigar shaped in some of them. The bill is short, it is slightly decurved, and swifts have a wide gape. And if you've ever seen pictures of any of the nightjars, the whippoorwills, the nighthawks, things like that, and you've seen pictures of them going for insects, you can know how wide their gape is. Swifts have a very similar gape. Um, that their head is small, the neck is short, the legs are very short with short, stout feet. And in some of them, they are pamprodactyl. And I will talk about pamprodactyl toes in a few minutes here. And the sexes are generally similar, so they're not distinguishable just by appearance. Now, some other swift facts about chimney swifts. They are gray-brown and have a lighter throat color. They're about 5 inches long. The wingspan is anywhere from like 12 and a half to 14 inches. They weigh about 8/10 of an ounce. They do have a tube or cigar shaped body with curving wings and stiff, shallow wing beats that give it a very distinctive flight style. Chimney swifts are constantly in flight, and they alternate between very rapid wing beats and then a gliding motion with the wings held straight out, kind of like that. When it is in flight, you will often hear it making these chittering vocalizations, which it does very frequently while it is flying. It has speed, it has agility, and it has superior eyesight in order to catch insects in flight. And its mean air speed, not 180, not 150. It is about 30 miles an hour. They can go up to about 40. But I did do a quick search and I see the source where some people saw the 150 and 180. Yeah, they're kind of off. Not even close to that. Chimney swifts are gregarious species and gregarious, and they seldom hunt alone. They're usually hunting in groups of 2, maybe up to 20. In the migration, they can be in flocks of anywhere from 6 to 20 individuals. At rest, the wings will extend an inch to an inch and a half below the tail. The tail, and you can see in this picture, there are 10 tail feathers, and each ends in a sharp exposed point. And this is used to help brace itself against vertical surfaces. And you can probably think of another species that uses its tail, stiff tail, to brace itself. Think of the woodpeckers. It's very similar to how woodpeckers' tail help brace them. The legs are short, but the feet are strong, and they're able to cling effortlessly to textured surfaces or um, small ledges like this when they're not in flight, but they cannot perch, such as on a wire or a branch like songbirds, and they can't walk. Because of these short legs and long wings, they really can't even take off from a vertical surface. They have to be taking off from a horizontal surface. Their toe structure is rather unique. As I mentioned, they can't walk or perch. They have to cling to these textured vertical surfaces, such as insides of chimneys or in hollow trees or caves. The feet are like other songbirds in that there are 3 toes forward and 1 back, and this is called anisodactyl, 3 toes forward and 1 back. However, swifts can move the 1 toe from the back to the front to get a better grip. As you can see here, when they're gripping like that, all 4 toes are up here. That's called pamprodactyl, 3 toes forward, and basically a flexible toe that can be either forward or backward depending on what it needs. So I hope you have learned a new vocabulary word, at least one, for today. Chimney swifts summer in urban and suburban habitats across the eastern half of the US and southern Canada. And you probably are familiar with seeing these birds flying around the Baltimore area. They'll fly over the middle of cities. They'll fly out in the suburbs. Really, they just forage over any open areas. They can even forage over rather open forests, ponds, residential areas, and they eat airborne insects. Hence, they're called aerial insectivores. And these insects they eat are mostly mosquitoes, gnats, termites, airborne spiders, and biting flies. So they are good because they take care of the bugs that we generally do not like. A nesting swift with 3 young in the nest will consume the weight equivalent of 5,000 to 6,000 housefly-sized insects every day. An adult will consume about 1/3 of its weight in insects every day, and its weight being about 8 or 9 tenths. So you can figure it eats about 1/3 of an ounce of insects a day. And if you think about how many insects would actually make up 1/3 of an ounce, it is quite a few. And swifts really do just about everything in the air, including bathing, drinking, and collecting nesting material. The And I want to show this habitat association, which is, I think, rather interesting. Um, that this came from eBird data. So here is the zero line of, not preferring or hating a certain thing. You can see urban and built up habitats are the predominant areas where this bird forages and spends its time. Secondarily, over um, croplands and just some other open areas. The areas that it will show a preference to avoid are mixed forests and woody savannas. So it really doesn't like being in thick woods. The chimney swifts um, will bathe on the wing by gliding down to the water at a long shallow angle on stationary wings just held out. It smacks the water with its breast and the whole undersurface of its body, as you can see the aftermath of that. It bounces up and then vigorously shakes the water from its plumage. And like us with shampooing, it will rinse and repeat many times while it's taking a bath. But if you've ever seen this, it's a rather fascinating behavior. Now, as I mentioned earlier, um, and we'll talk about migration and these big communal roosts in chimneys, but when nesting is taking place, there is only ever one nesting pair in a chimney or a swift tower or other nesting structure. Unmated birds can sometimes roost in the nesting chimney, and occasionally they will provide additional care for the chicks. So nesting starts around May and runs through August. Now, if you're not familiar with these annual cycle charts, it's a very complicated looking, but once you get to know them, easy way to see what this bird does throughout the year. So for nesting, um, the outer bar is the eggs and the inner bar is the young. So the outer bar, eggs from May through June, and then young would be from June through August. So that's essentially the nesting time. Egg laying will actually start when the nest is about half finished, which is somewhere between 3 and 6 days. It'll take about 18 days to complete the nest, and when the nest is done, it'll be about 2 to 3 inches from the surface out, about 4 inches wide and an inch deep. And they typically lay 3 to 5 small white eggs. And that to me just does look very precarious. Now, the way they build their nest is they grab these small sticks while they're flying. And I think, did that, yeah, let me go back. Yeah. So you can see here as the bird is flying, it is not perched anywhere. It is flying through and grabbing with its bill, snapping off a branch. So it will do that and take it back to the chimney most likely. And it has a glue-like saliva that hardens almost into what has the strength of cement or super glue. And over 18 days, they will construct um, what what you see here, a half saucer type of nest. Incubation takes about 19 to 20 days, and incubation actually starts when the next to last egg is laid. And so after they hatch, they grow rapidly. In fact, hatchlings will increase their body mass from when they're hatched, it's about 1 to 1.5 grams. And as a point of reference, 1 ounce is 28 grams. So 1 to 1.5 grams is not very much at hatching. But in the first 10 days in the nest, their body mass will increase 10 to 12 fold till they get up to about 80% of their adult weight. Then after that, the increase drops off sharply and they reach the 75 to 100% of their adult mass at about 20 days. And you can see things get really crowded. There is still, I think, a bird in there, and they start to climb out actually within even a day. If they're forced to, their claws or toes are strong enough that they can actually cling to the side, typically after a few days, but they start to get their feathers. At about 30 days, they'll take their first flight out of the nest. And at 3 days old, this is what they look like. And these are birds obviously in rehab that had to be rescued with all that yummy food going down there. So what makes chimney swifts? I mean, we've seen now that they're pretty fantastic, I think, and extraordinary. But what makes them even more extraordinary? Migration is one of those phenomena in nature that I find to be one of the most fascinating of any aspect of birds. Um, Birds will undertake these long migrations, and more often than not, the adults will fly, they'll migrate before the young of the year do. So, young of the year are generally left to their own to find their migration. So, this is migratory patterns and behavior that is ingrained within their DNA. For us, if we were just to be left on the side of the road with no GPS, no tracking devices of any kind, no road maps, we'd be hard pressed to travel the 5,000 miles that birds like chimney swifts travel. So in the fall, um, the birds will start to gather in large communal roosts, and these can be 50 birds up to several thousand birds. Generally, their migration in the fall is across the Gulf of Mexico. A few may come around the Caribbean and very few around this way, but in general, it's trans-Gulf migration. And they head down to um, western Peru and then the upper Amazon basin of eastern Peru, northern Chile, and northwest Brazil. That's the primary areas where they spend the winter. Spring migration is um, more hurried than in their fall migration. Fall migration, not necessarily leisurely, but spending time in these large communal roosts, they're not in as quite as much of a hurry. So in the spring, very few birds seem to do a trans-Gulf migration. Most seem to come around the Gulf slope of Mexico and then some across into the Caribbean. This entire round trip is anywhere from 6 to 10,000 miles. So these birds do that every year. In the Baltimore area, peak migration usually occurs around April in the spring, and in the fall, it really hits its peak around September. Okay, here we go. Don't see the little thing. So this is an animated abundance map provided by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And I wish I could slow it down. If you go onto the eBird site and go under their science and look at search for a species like chimney swift and then look at all the abundance maps, you can find the animated abundance and you can actually slow it down. So it starts in January maybe. Oh, uh, there we go. And you can see how they move up, um, and then breeding, and then you can see how it gets more dense toward migration in the fall. And in the spring, you can see it's very kind of, you can see it going around the Gulf that way. And they spread out during breeding. And then in the fall, when these communal roosts happen, you can see the density in specific areas just gets a lot more intense. And this is why, when after nesting, they gather in these increasingly large communal roosts all throughout the east. And then in the fall, you can see the jump that all of a sudden they're starting to come in down here. So these communal roosts, I think, are what really makes this bird extraordinary. And it is fortunately something that is relatively easy for all of us to see in the Baltimore area or pretty much anywhere that you are. So um, during migration, particularly the fall migration, the swifts will leave their nesting areas after all the young have fledged, and they'll just start gathering in these communal, larger and larger roosts where a bunch of birds are gathering. They begin congregating at dusk, and they'll start to swirl around the chimney they've selected that night to go in. And here's another view, just so you can see some of them starting to go down in, as I think John had mentioned earlier, this little swirl. And inside one of these larger industrial chimneys, um, well, before you get to that, so they'll do this circle, 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 and then all of a sudden one of them seems to be the leader, will start, and then all of a sudden they just all start going down. Some will go down feet first, others go head first, but what they generally do, they'll go down and then abruptly right themselves and then go to the wall. And then that's where they'll cling onto the wall. And here you can see if this was a single bird coming into a nest, they do the same thing. And then they would just hop up to get to the nest. And the following morning after this, if and I have not seen this myself yet, and this is one thing I do want to see. You can see the birds all leaving this large roost as if they're being shot out of the chimney. I've seen videos of it, and it's it's pretty remarkable. So, looking inside one of these roosts, and this is, I'd say, by some accounts, a very small one. You can see all the birds clinging to the side, head up, of course, um, waiting for night to end, and then they will get out of there. Now, occasionally, a preferred nesting chimney, roosting chimney, may not be available. And one of the benefits of these roost chimneys is that the temperature inside, with all those swifts in there, it helps increase the temperature inside. And in some cases, depending on the outside temperature, if it gets down really cold, the inside temperature in the chimney can be anywhere from 10 to 70 degrees warmer, depending on how small the chimney may be, than the outside temperature. So they like to gather together and they pack it in, as you can see here on this tree. The body mass together helps increase the temperature for them to withstand the cold overnight. And as I mentioned, Baltimore Bird Club has been counting swifts in the fall and the spring for 20 years now. And this is just a graph to show you kind of their high numbers for the year in spring and fall. I think a nicer way to look at it is with a graph. And you can see it in the fall in the blue, um, much more activity in these communal roosts than in the spring. And as I mentioned earlier, in the spring, they're in a little more of a hurry to get to a nesting site, so they don't spend as much time in these communal roosts. They sort of have a mission that they're on with that. But you can see, the peaks and valleys and peaks and valleys. Um, in particular, in 2018, there was a particularly low fall roost, and the likely culprit of that was Hurricane Florence. You can see as it was coming in here, the prevailing winds shifted around the hurricane when it was coming in, which diverted birds away from the eastern seaboard and the Atlantic coast area, which likely was the reason why there were only 350 birds as the high count in 2018. Alice Greeland Nelson has been staking out the bookbindery in the Hampton area of Baltimore. And over starting the 16th through a couple nights ago, she has had some good tallies, up to 1,400, which may have been a somewhat early pulse. And you can see if you track that, shoot, I missed the date, the sunset. So this is probably right around dusk or sunset, maybe just a little before. And then the last one is maybe 20 to 30 minutes after official sunset. As September starts to be with us and the days get shorter, there will be more swifts coming in. And this is a good sign, pending, notwithstanding another hurricane that may come in to disrupt the flow. This looks like it might be a fairly good fall season for swift migration, and I will show you where you can take advantage of having some observers to help you out look for some of these swift roosts. So we talked about the population declines, um, but what's really causing them? Well, for chimney swifts, they feed on flying insects. And you may have heard about the alarming decline in insects, particularly flying insects. And if any of you are old enough to think back maybe 20, 30, 40 years driving around late summer, you call it the windshield splat test. If you can remember how many insects you got splatted on your windshield years ago, think about what you're seeing today. And I can attest to this. Growing up, I mean, it could be really bad. And I grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, by the way. And now you can drive, a couple hours all over the place and barely have any insects hitting your windshield. So that's not just bad for insects, it's bad for aerial insectivores. And as we saw, their populations are all declining. So, pesticides likely are one of the biggest problems for flying insects, because most pesticides that are used are these broad spectrum. They just kill anything it comes in contact with in terms of insects. The other is loss of nesting habitat. And it's interesting when we talk about nesting habitat for chimney swifts, it's actually human structures, but that is their nesting habitat. Brick chimneys, prior to colonization, European colonization coming in 1600s or so, swifts would nest in caves, hollow trees, um, other structures that had those vertical surfaces they could cling to build their nest. They readily and rapidly took to mason chimneys when they started being built during colonialization. And hence the name chimney swift, they pretty much adapted to that. A lot of brick chimneys in homes in particular are starting to deteriorate to the point that swifts cannot use them to nest. Additional chimneys are being capped like this. This kind of cap does not allow the swifts to come in to use it as a nesting or a roosting site. Some typical mason chimneys are being retrofitted with metal interiors. These are not appropriate for swift nesting because there's nothing for them to cling on to. So these really, if you do have metal chimneys, they should be capped permanently to prevent any swifts from getting in and not being able to get out. Chimney cleaning during the nesting season is a potential problem. That chimney sweeps, when they come in, they want to clean your chimney, and they should. That should be done on a regular basis if you use your chimney with firewood. But during the nesting season, they can actually knock down the nests. Swifts fly following insects. If they swoop down along the roads too low, they can occasionally have collisions with vehicles. Severe storms during migration, as we saw that image of Hurricane Florence. Not only does a hurricane like that make the birds go a different direction in migration, it can actually have direct mortality if it overtakes the birds a little faster than they're able to adapt to the changing wind conditions. And habitat loss on the wintering grounds. So a lot of where these birds roost in South America most likely are in trees and caves. So looking at deforestation in the wintering grounds is one potential issue. Now, here's how you can help. We all can help. If you have a mason chimney, your typical brick chimney, you want to try to leave the top open and the damper inside closed from March to October, which is when birds will start coming in from migration and leave at the end of nesting on the fall migration. Metal chimneys, as I mentioned, should be permanently capped just to prevent any swifts or other animals from going in and not being able to get out. Chimneys should be cleaned by early March, so probably after you use them for the winter, but before swifts come back in April, so some or even sometimes March. So cleaning them in early March is good. You can help by cooperating with conservation groups like Baltimore Bird Club, with Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, with other Maryland Ornithological Society or Audubon chapters to build a swift tower or two or three. And you can participate in these counts during migration. A swift night out is the name that was created by Paul and Georgine Kyle in Texas, who really are the authorities in chimney swifts. They started the Driftwood Wildlife Association, which has now been renamed Chimney Swift Conservation Association. And they literally have written a book on chimney swifts and building swift towers. I'll mention those again in a few seconds. So once these birds go in, again, just a view. Now here is a large industrial tower, I think at a college in Ontario, Canada. Anybody want to guess how many swifts are in that? More than 10, less than 10,000. And then here's a smaller, probably a house that has a chimney, and you can see them all packed in down at the bottom. And again, packing in close together helps generate more heat and helps them during cold nights during fall migration. So what I've been trying to do is put together a map of some of these larger roost chimneys here in the Overlea area, um, the St. Michael's Church, and then I think it's Glenmount Elementary and Middle School. Up in here, the Hampton area, the Bookbindery, the observatory at Druid Hills Park. I forget the name of the observatory there. And then recently, a couple people have noticed a bunch of birds going into a business, chimneying a business over here in the Catonsville area. So if you are interested in seeing how this works, I think it is September 22nd. That is coming up, I guess, like 3 weeks from yesterday on a Wednesday. Baltimore Bird Club does some of this previewing to determine where the swifts are. They don't always use the same chimneys every season, and maybe not even every night. So get in touch with Bronwyn if you want to sort of take a look at this preview night to see what may be going on at these two sites. And as of now, on September 26th, um, Baltimore Bird Club is going to be having their Swift Watch at the Bookbindery up here. And you can contact Alice Greeley Nelson at this email if you're interested in learning more about that. And I guess depending on what happens here through the next couple of weeks and what may be happening here, some of the sites may switch around a little bit. But I think if you keep in touch with both Bronwyn and Alice, you can probably get a sense of where the September 26th event will actually be held. I plan to be here at the Bookbindery or wherever they're having the event on the 26th because I have not yet seen these roosts in Baltimore. Um, as an aside, I will say I had the extreme pleasure to be out in Portland, Oregon, actually for a Partners in Flight meeting one September and went to Chapman Elementary School on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, where they get, I think it's on the order of 7 to 8 to 9,000 boxes swifts going in this elementary school. And I had never seen anything larger than just a couple hundred swifts going into a chimney before. The hillside was lined with families. They had their blankets down, they had their picnic baskets. It was a community event. There were, I guess there had to be close to 1,000 people there to watch this. There were a couple of little food carts. There was a person raising money for college selling cookies he had made with boxes swifts on them. It was just the most amazing thing. And then all these swifts flying around, flying around, flying around. And then a peregrine falcon came through. And oh my gosh, it kept cutting through, cutting through. Finally, it did get one of the swifts. And I don't know why, but the crowd cheered. it was it was interesting to see the falcon go through, and then some of them would just follow right behind after it went through. I guess that's kind of the safest place to be when there's a predator, is right behind it. But then falcon got its meal, went away, and then at some point they were just doing this swirl, swirl, swirl. I mean, it looks like a tornado. And then all of a sudden, this one bird decided, yep, it's time. Boom. And then they just started going down, going down. And when those first swifts started going down, the hillside erupted in cheers and applause. It's just, and I would imagine we'll experience some of that same thing. Maybe not with 1,000 people, but when that first swift goes down, it's just a phenomenon. I invite you, I urge you, if you want to be wowed by nature, this to me is one of the biggest wow and awe factors that nature has to offer. So one of the things that we started with Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership is the Chimney Swift Conservation Program. And the purpose is to stabilize and hopefully begin to increase chimney swift populations in Maryland and beyond. I mean, if you're increasing populations, it's going to be beyond Maryland. And we have set recovery goal objectives. And one of the main objectives is just to assess the population in terms of um, distribution abundance, trends, and threats, knowing where all these roosting chimneys are, but also trying to get an idea what chimneys, where swifts are actually nesting in chimneys. And we have a form on our website where you can enter information if you have swifts nesting in your chimney. That'll help us internally track where all these chimney nestings are. They won't, any house, residence, chimneys with nesting will not be put on a public map, but it's more for us to sort of get a sense for where there may be concentrations and why are they nesting in certain neighborhoods and not others. We want to identify, protect, and restore the nesting and roosting habitats, these sites, these chimneys. So in some cases, large chimneys sometimes tend to be on schools or businesses that are slated to be torn down and new ones built. If there are significant roosts in these chimneys, we want to know where they are. And in the case of what I mentioned, the Voxus Swift at Chapman Elementary School, Portland Audubon Society actually raised money so they could build an alternative heating system. And that chimney is now dedicated for the use of chimney swifts. Because what they were doing out there is students and teachers were bringing their coat, wearing their coats to school because Portland, Oregon, you get into September, late September, it can get down to 50, 60 degrees. And they were sacrificing their warmth for the birds. But now, through a conservation effort, raising money, everybody's happy, everybody's warm. We want to help increase the availability of nest sites. And again, nest sites for swifts are chimneys or swift towers. And of course, we want to raise the awareness among the public. Um, these birds are just amazing. They eat the things that bug us, these bugs. So you can go to these events. You can then tell other people, hey, you got to come see this. And so, like a lot of things with nature, once you see it for firsthand, that switch goes off. Um, just like for birds, I think if you ever get a chance to go to a bird banding station, if you get the chance to hold a bird in your hand and let it go, you will forever be in love with birds. I don't care who you are before that. Things like that, when you connect with nature in these ways, you sort of had to have this tide change that you then become an advocate for the conservation of these species. And that's our objective with that. Swift towers are starting to become a very popular um, structure for building. If you remember back to the days when when the eastern bluebird was in serious decline, and bluebird trails came up, and now bluebirds, that's a great success. We have the North American Bluebird Society and state chapters. There's a Maryland Bluebird Society. Bluebirds, that has really helped and still continues to help them. Now with swifts, it's the same thing, except instead of a bluebird box, it's a little bit bigger and maybe a little bit more complicated. Uh, but you can be very simplistic. This was an Eagle Scout project um, by forgot his name already. Uh, Scott somebody out in Iowa. Here is a local project um, that I am currently president of the Anne Arundel Bird Club. So when they were looking for a conservation project, I said, I have an idea. Let's build a chimney swift tower. So Anne Arundel Bird Club took that idea, ran with it, raised money. Here are the people with Friends of Kinder Farm Park who actually did the construction. Here's the completed tower that was put in um, early this summer. I don't think there were any birds nesting in it yet, um, but nesting had probably already started for these birds, so it might have been a little late. Here is the Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania has installed, I think, about 150 of these swift towers in parks and schools in the greater Pittsburgh area, and they're doing pretty well with that. Now, people are starting to get really creative with some of these too. Here is on the roof of a business, a really large tower that I think was primarily installed to be a roost tower. The creativity in what these things can look like is only limited by your imagination. A nice, very nice stone structure. Man, that had a lot of love being built into it. modern look for this. This is in Atlanta, Georgia, in Piedmont Park, to blend in with their native flower garden. And you can do paintings on the side. You can have it as a project for kids to contribute artwork that will go on the side of these things. So I would encourage you, in appropriate areas, this is a great thing to do for nesting. You might get a pair nesting in it, and then during migration, something of this size could get 50, maybe even up to 100 swifts roosting in it. I mentioned those books. These are just really, really cool books. The America's Mysterious Birds Above the Fireplace is a pretty lengthy book, and it gives a lot about the natural history of birds, their nesting habitats, and has some basic information on building a swift tower. And this book really is, if you want to build a chimney swift tower, has all kind of the blueprints, the materials you need for one of the towers that's straight up, or if you want to add the interpretive kiosk around, which if you're putting it in a park or the place where the public really goes, I would really encourage you to do that. It's just one of these information areas, public awareness areas that just is waiting to happen and can be a great education tool. Again, on our website, marylandbirds.org, if you go to the Chimney Swifts page, there's a link that I have a bunch of copies of this book that I was able to get. And I just asked a $15 donation for each book, either one or both if you want, and I'll mail those right out to you. Bronwyn, how are we doing on time? Do we have like 5 more minutes?
Yep, we're good.
Okay. Then I am going to show this video, I hope.
This is a marvelous song by Cole Porter,
Are you hearing that audio
orchestrated by
too?
Johnny Mandel.
This is from Baltimore Bird Club. This is really cool.
Yeah, they keep going behind.
Yes, sir.
See that tornado effect. They're starting to go down.
I'm trying.
As I gaze out of my window,
Yeah.
What'd they
and the
do?
moon is
They're changing
flying,
up. See what
all
new
thoughts
doing
all
their system.
stray
Their system adjusts.
to you in the still of the night.
Yeah! Yeah!
While the world lies in slumber, or the times without number, darling, when I say to you, do
There's the chimney.
you love me just like I love you?
What's going to bring them here? This is a place they know as that the whole community is going to gather. 6:45, and this is the time to start.
Right.
Are you this dream of mine? Will it fade? That great big dream come true? Like the moon.
Trying to count how many of them.
But there's still a lot.
10,
They're still in a circle.
10, 10, 10.
One more to go.
This is undercounting. 10, 10, 10. Right.
Every one of those tents is a
10,
20.
10,
Keep it up. You're doing great.
right. 10,
I'm your witness.
10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. Oh, look at that. Stop for a second.
Yeah. They're giving you a break.
Like, no, it's so dark. 10,
Circles
10.
come in.
10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10,
Just like I love you.
10. John's got to count.
Are you my life to be? That great big dream come true.
Yeah.
As you can see, it gets dark. It gets
That
dark.
just flew over my head.
Look at that.
No more over here. They're all in there.
740. Still going in. Still counting.
Look at that, ladies and gentlemen.
Not quite.
Yeah.
I'd say that.
Quite a parade.
Wow. Still going in.
Yeah.
Now there'll be one showing up, running in.
All part is marvelous. Thank you.
I cannot wait to see that once again. If you have never experienced that in person, you got to go. I hope you can all get out at some point and see all this. So that is all I have for presentation. Here's contact information that I'll leave up there for a few seconds. Again, I want to thank Baltimore Bird Club, Joan Swee, Alice Greeley Nelson, Carol Schrader for information and for all their efforts over the years and what will be ongoing efforts to help identify where swifts are roosting and help with the conservation of this extraordinary, incredible species. If we have time for questions.
Yeah, let's come back together, and I'm sure we have some questions. Thank you, Chris. That was an amazing presentation. It makes me love those birds even more. It was when I went out there with Carol and was seeing them, and you don't even understand how they can just, they almost look like they just disappear into the chimneys. It's quite amazing. If we have questions for Chris, you can raise your hand. You can put it in the chat box for us. Let me just go back real
I
quick.
see one question. How much does it cost to build a tower?
Yeah.
Well, over the last year and a half, the cost has gone up quite a bit. For whatever reason, during the pandemic, construction materials just skyrocketed. In that book, based on some of the information in there and what I talked with Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania, they did the entire tower and the kiosk for just about $1,000, a little bit under. By the time we were done with the one at Kinder Farm Park, working with Anne Arundel Bird Club, the cost, well, what was it? It ended up being almost $2,000. Now, given that, I think it can be done probably still for $1,500 or less. The things you need to worry about is if you have the right kind of insulation, because you want to make sure, at the heat of the summer, you have insulation that it doesn't get too hot, that the birds overheat, that you do the right thing for predator guards with that. The information kiosk, you can make it simple, you can make it fancy. But I would say, you're probably to do one with an information kiosk around it about $1,500, maybe a little more right now.
And on that same vein, is there research done before it's decided where to place a tower? Sue wants to know what, where would you place it? What's good? What's bad?
Yeah, unfortunately, bluebird boxes were kind of, you build it, they will come. Chimney swifts, it's a little more hit and miss. I think Audubon in Western Pennsylvania has found this out. They have, I think it's just a little over 50% success rate with all those. So the one thing, if you think about it, where do swifts nest now? They typically nest in urban, suburban areas where there are houses and a lot of chimneys. So if you think about what their search image may be when seeking out a suitable nesting area, they're going to go to this type of thing where there are houses around other structures. So putting it out in the middle of a field, not near anything, is probably not what you want to do. I think Paul and Georgie and Kyle suggest putting it near a house. And some people I've talked with that they have plans to, they want to cap their chimney, but they have swifts, but they don't want to take away the swift nesting opportunities. So they're letting the swifts nest out this season, and then they're going to build a tower in their backyard or the side of the house before they cap the chimney. So I don't think there is a magic formula, but I would tend to say the closer to another structure, probably the better. But
Okay.
that's yet to be determined, I think.
And there are a couple of questions. Are roosting and nesting chimneys the same?
There can be, potentially there can be birds, a a pair nesting in one of those huge industrial chimneys. But again, there's only ever one pair that will nest in a structure. Um, I remember going out when my son was in Cub Scouts, um, took them out as part of their bird badge stuff to downtown Warrenton, Virginia, where I was living at the time. And it was an old house converted to some businesses. So basically, it was an old kind of 1800s house with, that style chimney, maybe a little larger than a typical house chimney. And I know there was a pair nesting in there, but this was during the swift migration time, and we had swifts go in. And as part of the fun, I tried to have them guess. I had each one of them take a guess of how many swifts went in. The guesses range from 10 to over 1,000. Um, I think I was a little bit closer, and I had 120. So that was 120. I mean, you get 100, 150 probably within a typical house chimney roosting. Now, I think as birds, they move a little bit farther south and farther south, there are more groups, more of these communal groups that come together. So they might be in larger numbers. And I think there was an Alabama or Mississippi site I just read about that had almost 20,000 in one. But again, that's a large industrial chimney. So you can have these small communal roosts, or you can have the really huge ones. So yes, any structure can have a nesting pair, and then fall migration in particularly, you can have um, a bunch more roosting.
And you said that they did everything on the wing. Does that
Yes.
include mating?
I in doing more research on the life history of these birds, I thought they did, because there are some birds that will do that. But swifts actually will do it, do the copulation. They'll do mating displays, and one of them is they fly with like their wings in a V, one behind the other, and do various displays that way. But copulation actually takes place inside the chimney, um, typically below or at the side of the nest that's being built. And that's again because of, they have to cling on to something like that. Why they don't do it while they're flying, I don't know. But I read the scientific account from Birds of North America, and they had documented studies about that. So as far as I know, no, they don't do it in the air. They do it at home.
And Kathy wants to know, where did they roost before there were houses? And I guess onto that, was it just that the chimneys were, when the chimneys appeared out of nowhere, basically, they just became the more preferred site?
Yeah, but yeah, before colonization, they would nest in hollow trees. A lot of times you'll see these broken off trees, really big ones or small ones, and they kind of get then hollowed out, and then so that allows them to, cling onto the side of it. Caves a lot of times have that rough, textured surface that they can cling onto and build so they would nest in what they found out in nature. Um, Chimneys, it's suspected that chimneys provided much more protection from rain and from heat and from predators. And with the original brick and mason chimneys, a very rough surface that they could easily cling to. So they just started going there, and you will, especially in Canada. It seems that there are, I don't know, maybe even up to half of the chimney swifts in Canada still nest in trees and caves as opposed to human structures. And some of that may be just because the boreal forest is so vast up there, and civilization doesn't extend as far as we have it all crunched in here. So even around here, occasionally you might find a swift pair nesting in a tree somewhere. But the protection from the elements and predators is probably why they really favor chimneys.
A couple of questions on the nesting again. Are they territorial? Do they need to be separated like the nesting chimneys by any distance? And then if there's only one pair nesting in one structure, does that mean they would have to use other cavities to keep their population from declining?
Well, and that, if you remember, a couple of things that I showed. The one map that showed the breeding distribution, that it looked fairly uniform across the eastern half of the U.S. That helps you understand that they spread out the nest because they're limited in their nesting habitat, which are these structures. And the other thing that I talked about were decaying chimneys being capped, most modern construction either being metal insides of chimneys or capped. So swifts are losing their natural habitat. The amount of dead trees that they might use too is probably still declining with urbanization and cutting down a lot of woodlands to make housing, and cutting down trees and planting new ones, sometimes ornamental, not even native. But they're basically just losing the number of structures per capita, you might say, that they used to have. So yeah, in order to keep reproducing, given that they only have one pair nesting in a structure, you need more and more of these structures. I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that if you have maybe a row house with chimneys in each one of those, and maybe you have 10 chimneys within 400 yards, I don't think there's any evidence suggesting that you won't possibly get a swift in each chimney. So they're territorial from the sense of being in the structure, but not keeping other birds away from that structure itself. So we need more structures. We need swift towers. Um, Chimneys in disrepair is one thing that I'm trying to look at, and I would love to be able to start some kind of fund that if we know we have nesting chimneys somewhere and this chimney is really desperately in need of repair, that we might be able to help the homeowner I've got a lot of dreams like that. It just takes funding. That's all.
Right. Randy wants to know the relationship or conflict, any conflicts between bats and swifts for territory or structures.
Territory, I don't think so. The one thing to remember about swifts is that they're diurnal. They are active during the day. Most bats are nocturnal, which means they're active at night. So if you're an insect, that's bad news. If you're a nocturnal and diurnal insect, you got two things going after you. But no, there's no real competition there for food. In terms of nesting structures or roosting structures, um, I think woodland bats and bats that will go to bat boxes typically will go under the bark of a tree rather than in from the outside into a hollowed out tree. I don't think that there's any real kind of competition for habitat between bats and swifts.
And then finally, part of the reason why I've said that they are neighbors, not nuisance, is when I was looking at information about swift, I actually saw on the DNR page that it was considered a nuisance species, although it was a protected species. So you can't harm these guys either. So Joanne wrote, do the droppings of thousands of birds in a chimney cause issues? And I guess that kind of plays into the nuisance moniker that's been put on them.
That one chimney that I showed in Ontario, the big square one that they were all at the bottom. I have some other pictures that I guess you call it the guano gets really deep. And that's the potential conflict with these industrial chimneys. With a house, typically, I don't think the swifts actually defecate inside the chimney. They'll go out, and if they do, it's very, very minimal. But they will do it on occasion. I think that's the nuisance part is probably twofold. One, the noise when the young hatch and really then start begging for food. Apparently, some people are very disturbed by the noise that these young birds make. Um, some people even are a little freaked out by it. So that's one aspect of nuisance. The other could be, occasionally a young bird will fall out of the nest and actually then, will fall down potentially into the fireplace. That's a little bit of a nuisance. And then if there's any droppings, that could be. But that's, typically you want to get your chimney, if you use your chimney as a fireplace, if you use your fireplace and are burning wood with that, you want to get your chimney cleaned out on a regular basis just so you don't end up with fires coming from that. So a chimney sweep, when they clean the chimney, will take care of pretty much most of all that as well. Nuisance is definitely a human label we put on things. And to be a nuisance, it just has to mean that some people at some time don't like what a certain critter is doing. So yeah, to some people it is a nuisance. But when you have a species in such deep decline, I think we really need to look at what can we do to allow humans and swifts to cohabitate, so to speak. How can we have people get along with swifts in their chimney? And that for some people they don't mind, they like it. Other people they want to get rid of them and they cap their chimney because of the swifts.
And it looks like one last question: can purple martins and chimney swifts live with each other?
Absolutely, yeah. Purple martins, swifts. There'll be one pair of swifts in a nesting structure. Purple martins are colonial nesters. So you see these condos, you see all the gourds hanging. And some of these that I've seen are very large. So you can get 30, 40, maybe 50 purple martins all nesting in a colony. They really don't care about other birds, period, unless you have house sparrows or starlings trying to get in the martin condo or the gourds. But yeah, generally where you have these big congregations of purple martins, you maybe have one or two swifts. And then, their foraging groups, maybe you get up to max 20, but usually you see them in twos or threes. So I've never heard of any kind of competition between purple martins and swifts. So I would encourage you to provide housing for both if you can.
Yeah, and then as Randy said, sometimes humans can be a nuisance as well, and I think that's probably true more often than not. And on that note, we'll just
don't get me started on that one.
yeah, it goes down a different rabbit hole. But Chris, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. We all learned a lot, everybody, and I hope that this helps to create the awareness about the chimney swifts and excitement about their wonderful migration and how they live and what a benefit they are to us here, and how we can cohabitate and do what we can to help their populations improve. And one of those things is just understanding their natural history better. And I think that you did a great job of giving us that background. So thank you so much for that. If anybody's interested in kind of getting into this swift watching thing, please reach out to the Baltimore Bird Club or myself as we try to build up kind of some swift watchers in the area in Baltimore. So
Swift
it's a
groupies.
Swift groupies, right? It's a fun thing to do, and I hope to see y'all out there. So stay well, everybody. Stay safe and stay curious. And I hope to see you next week when we learn about, I think it's the Eastern oyster. And so everybody take care.
Hope to see people out there at the chimneys. Bye-bye.